The relationship between Zuko and Katara evolves drastically from where they start. What's beautiful is not that they start off hating each other, but gradually develop a close relationship that may have a tinge of romance depending on who you ask, but rather how that happens. Too many fictional relationships like this play up the whole, oh, we're so bad for each other, but we love each other angle, to the extent that it becomes rather tawdry and trashy. It's melodrama. They only grow close because they're attracted to each other, and it's not healthy. Now listen, despite my Columbia education, I would never say I'm too good for trashy, toxic melodrama, but that is definitely not what the relationship between Zuko and Katara is. Even if you don't support this pairing romantically, you should still be able to admit that it is heartwarming to see these two people, who originally thought they had nothing in common, realize that they have a lot of the same problems and same anxieties and same fears. And that it's wonderful that they come to understand each other and help each other and empathize with each other. If there are romantic undercurrents here, and I would argue that there are, these undercurrents are not what begin the process of the two of them becoming closer. Rather, they arise from the process of the two of them becoming closer, and that is a really significant difference. The core of the relationship is, thus, not pure attraction, but understanding. This is why I believe this relationship could work long-term, and why it is far more than just an example of the good girl choosing the angsty bad boy. Even putting aside that Zuko is far too earnest and compassionate to fit the conventional bad boy archetype, and Katara is far too given to passionate extremes and moral ambiguity to fit neatly into the good girl archetype. But this video is not just about Zutara, it is about how Zutara would have changed Avatar: The Last Airbender as a show had it happened. Obviously, the world of Avatar: The Last Airbender would not have necessarily accepted these two as a couple, particularly in the Fire Nation. There is the insistence throughout the show that the four nations are just meant to be that. Four. Separate. And this discourages the intermingling of people of these nations. Ethno-nationalists like Zhao are not the only people who would distrust this relationship between a firebender who's the new ruler and a waterbender like Katara. Even someone like Avatar Roku might have his doubts. He warns Aang against promoting the mixture of the four nations, saying that they're meant to be separate. So given that background, the idea that the military and bureaucracy of the Fire Nation, accustomed to 100 years of war with, among other peoples, the Water Tribe, would just accept Zuko's reforms and his relationship with Katara, that's nothing but naivete and pure idealism. In reality, it would be a lot messier. How do you react if you're these people and you see the leader of your country marry someone from a people you've been conditioned for a century to believe are inferior? But if you want more of my thoughts on that, I recommend checking out some of my other videos on these topics, such as, what if these two were married, or what if these two had kids? This video is less about that and more about how the pairing of these two would affect the ethos of Avatar: The Last Airbender as a television show. Zuko's pairing with Mai is fine. I rather like Mai as a character, but it has rather little to do with the rest of Avatar: The Last Airbender as a show, and very little to do with Zuko's journey throughout that show. After undergoing a complete transformation of the soul, realizing he cannot reconcile the beliefs he's been brought up in about the Fire Nation with the ugly material reality he sees, he rejects the influences of his father. He rejects the rosy, idealistic view of the Fire Nation he's bought into throughout his entire life. He pledges to steer the nation away from war and conflict and toward peace. And he ends up with his childhood crush. Do you see how that's kind of weird? I mean, I'm not saying it doesn't work, I'm just saying it's an odd choice for the narrative to make, since so much of the rest of Zuko's character journey is away from stasis, away from the beliefs he once held. Considering the relationship between Zuko and Mei, there is no real indication that the relationship is any different from how it had been. The growth Zuko has undergone has not really affected a change in this relationship. They seem to be together now just because they were together in the past. And the relationship between Katara and Aang operates on an even stranger plane. Now, I don't completely hate the Katang pairing. I even made a few videos praising it. And it is true that when I squint, I can see the outline of what the showrunners were going for. Creating a story of Katara realizing she loves Aang because Aang grows up and stops being a little kid and accepts the responsibilities of being the Avatar and really grows into his own. But it is really strange to see a narrative that is otherwise about promoting change and personal transformation and expanding one's horizons still end with Aang seeing that his crush on an older girl whose interest in him romantically has been at best sporadic throughout the series, seeing this kid get what he wants without having to reflect on the fact that, hey, maybe this childhood crush is not the best idea and not the best foundation for a mature relationship going forward. From Aang's perspective, this is a wonderful and triumphant victory, but how are we supposed to see it from Katara's perspective? Or from the perspective of ourselves as viewers of the show? It's a bit of a strange direction, and a gesture toward conventionality for a narrative that so eagerly either rejects or deepens the conventional paradigms we see in a lot of other ways. Sure, Sokka becomes a warrior, for instance, just like he wants, but he has to do a lot of reflecting on what becoming a warrior actually means. But I digress. In the original version of the show, as opposed to this alternate version we are contemplating, there are two major protagonists, Aang and Zuko. Now, one could argue, as I did in a video I never ended up making, that Katara is a sort of protagonist too, but for the most part, it is these two, Aang and Zuko. It's weird because the show starts with Aang as its 100% certain protagonist, and then as the show progresses, Zuko becomes more and more of a protagonist, and then at the very end it just flips right back to Aang being our main character. Aang is not only the protagonist because he's the one with the journey to save the world. You can write a story where the character who is our chosen one is not the main character. In fact, I've written short stories like that. No, Aang is the protagonist because he is the one the story revolves around. This focus on Aang lessens in Season 2 and the first half of Season 3, but then we get to the moral problem of Aang having to kill the Fire Lord, and though this has never been brought up before, we just switch right back into Aang's point of view. And we're supposed to sympathize with him. Now, imagine if we got the last few episodes of the show from the perspective of other characters and not Aang. Wouldn't we get more of the sense that his running away is not this righteous act to find the moral solution to the problem, but rather a real inconvenience, considering that we're going to fight the Fire Lord very soon? Imagine if you're Katara in this situation, or especially Sokka or Toph. These characters could have had a little more time to fight the Fire Lord instead of having to do it during the invasion, but instead they had to wait for Aang, so the final fight became more difficult. And this discussion about perspective is particularly cogent in regards to romance. If Aang's perspective was not one of the major perspectives of the show, his desire to romance Katara would likely be viewed more negatively by us, the viewers, than it currently is. Accordingly, making Zutara happen would shift the center of the show away from Aang and toward Zuko. Aang would either, number one, end the story angry and sullen despite his victory, or number two, and more hopefully, he would demonstrate maturity and not try to sabotage the relationship between Katara and Zuko, even though he, of course, has these very strong affections for Katara. The relationship between Zuko and Katara would become the show's most important relationship. It would not only be a symbol of understanding and empathy and compassion and realizing that the person you share a soul with might not be a person you originally expected you had anything to do with, anything in common with. It would also become the romantic center of the show. I wouldn't go so far as to say that Aang would not be a protagonist in this scenario, but he would certainly be less of a protagonist than Zuko. Sure, Aang saves the world, but Zuko saves it too. If Aang defeated Ozai, but Azula was still there to take the throne, I don't see what else would have changed. I don't see what really would have changed in the Fire Nation. If anything, the country would have continued deteriorating. In this scenario, Zuko changed and found not only self-actualization, but true love with someone who understands not only his past and his sorrows, but also his hopes and his ambitions and the essence of his being. While Aang only succeeded in stepping into his expected duties as the Chosen One, succeeding politically but failing romantically. Now, one could argue that Zuko is already the protagonist of Avatar: The Last Airbender, but if Zutara happened, depriving Aang of the romance he believes himself entitled to, that would secure the impression that Avatar is really Zuko's story. And it is hard to complain about that. He really is a great character who deserves all the acclaim he's gotten. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like and comment and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. Keep watching Avatar: The Last Airbender. It is a brilliant and thoughtful and empathetic show that is only growing more relevant as the years go by. I love it. Here's hoping it gets even more acclaim and praise than it has gotten. It really does deserve to be regarded as one of the best shows of the 2000s. Anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. Thank y'all again. Adios, comrades.